Hello and welcome to Talking Tudors, a fortnightly podcast about the ever-fascinating Tudor dynasty. My name is Natalie Grueninger and I'll be your host and guide on this journey through 16th century England. Are you ready to step through the veil of time into the dazzling and dangerous world of the Tudor court? Without further ado, it's time to talk Tudors. Everyone, welcome back to Talking Tudors, episode 71, and the first in our All Things Boleyn series. I'm your host, Natalie Grueninger, and it's wonderful to have your company. Before we dive into this week's episode, I'd like to thank the wonderful patrons who continue to support this podcast, and welcome patrons who joined the Talking Tudors family in April. A very warm welcome to Lucy, Louise, Sunsaray, and Holly. I'm so very thankful for your support and immense generosity. If you'd like to support the work I do, I invite you to become a Talking Tudors patron. It's easy to do. Just click on the Be My Patron on Podbean badge on the homepage of my website, www.onthetudortrail.com, or click on the Be a Patron button on the Podbean app. Join the Talking Tudors patron family and you'll be automatically entered into our patron-only monthly giveaways. In keeping with our Boleyn theme this month, May's prize is Anne Boleyn's Most Happy Portrait pendant in bronze, made by the ever-talented Lucy Churchill. Lucy's reconstruction of Anne's portrait medal, the only contemporary likeness of the Queen to survive, is based on extensive research, and it is truly exquisite. I own both the portrait medal reconstruction and the pendant, and can honestly say they are among my most treasured possessions. Thank you to Lucy for sponsoring this incredible prize. Now, on to today's episode. I'm delighted that joining me on the show to talk about the love letters of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn is my dear friend Sandra Vasoli. Sandy grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA. As a child, she developed an abiding interest in objects and stories from long ago, historic houses, antiques, period clothes, and tales from the past. A passionate reader and enthusiastic writer, she also spent her formative years caring for dogs and riding horses. She earned degrees in biology and English from Villanova University and then pursued graduate work in organizational development during her long career in human resources. After leaving the corporate world, Sandy wrote and published her debut novel, Struck with the Dart of Love, Je Anne Boleyn. Uniquely positioned as Anne Boleyn's memoir, it is the story of the tumultuous relationship between Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII of England. With a deep appreciation for meticulous research, Sandy was permitted rare access to the papal library at the Vatican to read and study the original love letters penned in the 16th century by Henry VIII to his wife Anne Boleyn. She has also done extensive research in the British Library, viewing the beautiful Book of Hours, in which Henry and Anne both inscribed lovers' messages to each other, and documents attributed to a mysterious letter purportedly written by Boleyn while she was imprisoned in the Tower before her execution. The result of that research has been published in Anne Boleyn's Letters from the Tower, a new assessment. She continues to research this letter and other artefacts authored or owned by Queen Anne Boleyn. My conversation with Sandy straight after this musical break, courtesy of singer-songwriter Karliene. The song Winter Rose is from the Ballad of Anne Boleyn, Karliene's best-selling album inspired by the life of Henry VIII's second queen consort, Anne Boleyn. I also recommend you listen right to the end, as we have a special announcement, a giveaway for you, courtesy of the lovely Sandy Vasoli. Talking Tudors, Sandy, how are you?
I am doing very well, Natalie. I'm delighted to be back, and I just would like to thank you for having me, and also send out a well wish to all of your listeners, wherever they might be, that they are doing well and staying safe during this time. And it's great to have this series of podcasts for some entertainment while we all stay home.
Oh, thank you for those lovely well wishes. And I should have said welcome to All Things Boleyn as well, which is our series of podcasts that we've been doing over May and June as well. So, Sandy, this isn't your first time on Talking Tudors. In January 2019, you and I chatted about Anne Boleyn's Tower Letter. Now, for anyone listening that is, has their curiosity piqued by that, that was in episode 20, so you can go and have a little listen to that. But since then, we've actually had a lot of new listeners find the show, which is wonderful. So would you mind just introducing yourself again and telling us a little bit about your background?
Well, I'd be happy to. Thank you. I am an author, a researcher, and aficionado of Tudor history, specifically the life of Anne Boleyn, and even more specifically, the relationship between Anne and Henry, which is my area of fascination. And as I've learned and researched over the last, I guess, it's been 10 years or more, I've become extremely interested in the correspondence between Anne and Henry and the letter that Anne wrote supposedly from the Tower. So I've focused some study on that. In my previous life, before I began writing my two novels, and through that doing research and delving into a lot of study, hands-on study about Anne and about Henry, I was a human resources executive for one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And my specialty there was people development, organization development, working with people to maximize their potential. So I had a lot of time and interest in studying, kind of focusing on the social sciences, studying human behavior, and I've found that it really has informed my research and my writing over the years. After I left there, I decided to write a book about Anne Boleyn, and I began delving into the study of her and her relationship with Henry, and it's taken me to some wonderful places and seeing some very fascinating, wonderful things in some of the premier libraries in the world. And that's really my passion. So I've been working on that ever since and will continue to do so.
Wonderful. Now, Sandy, while researching your fabulous novels, and if people out there haven't read them yet, I highly recommend you do that, and your books, you had the great privilege of seeing the love letters that Henry VIII wrote to Anne Boleyn during their courtship. And I think you're the only person I know that saw them not once, but twice, so very lucky. These 17 letters are written in English and French, and they're incredibly important for many reasons, including the fact that they're actually penned in Henry's own hand, which for people listening out there was actually a very rare thing. The king didn't often write his own letters. So, Sandy, tell us about this incredible experience.
Well, I'd be happy to. It's quite a broad story, if you will. And I think really it started in maybe back in 2011, when I was planning to take a trip to Rome. And I had already been in the British Library, had gone through the preliminary approval process to be able to see the Book of Hours in which Anne and Henry wrote messages to each other. That was a really, really profound experience for me. And so, I looked at some other documents while I was at the British Library, and then we were planning a trip to Rome. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to try to see whether I might be able to get permission to get in there and see these love letters. And I really didn't expect that I would gain the permission, but I embarked on quite a rigorous process of communicating with the library prefect and the individual at the time who headed up the ancient manuscripts department. And all of the communication had to be in very formal Italian. I'm very fortunate that I have a dear friend who is quite a brilliant woman. She's involved in a lot of different things. She's a very astute social scientist herself. She is a linguist and a student of history and other things, Signora Luisa Di Capua. And she helped me in putting together the communications, the emails that went back and forth. And I spent a good amount of time, probably 10, 11 months back and forth, providing documentation, letting them know what I wanted to see, answering questions about why I wanted to see them. Eventually, just before the trip, which was in September of 2012, got a permission to at least arrive at the library and present my documentation with the possibility of seeing the letters. So that's what I did. I arrived, went through the process of going through the Swiss Guard, and then you go into another area where your papers are examined. And when you pass through there, then you're allowed into the courtyard that is provides access to the library. Library doors, you go through there, and then you wait until you're admitted to the office of the Secretariat, where you spend time discussing, reviewing paperwork, etc., eventually to receive your pass to go upstairs into the Ancient Manuscripts room. So that was the beginning of the process. And then, I got up there and still had to wait. I think I arrived in the Ancient Manuscripts room at probably about 10 a.m. and I did not see the letters until about 2 in the afternoon. I had to wait for the director, the head, to return from a meeting, because even though I had kind of a preliminary approval, they're highly, highly restricted. And I spent some time talking with him and reassuring him that I would be very careful with them, and that, I knew how to handle documents like that, because, I was actually able to sit with them privately and touch them. And you don't wear gloves. They don't want you to wear gloves because you're clumsier when you have gloves on. So they would prefer it if you have dry, clean hands. And you, of course, touch them as little as possible. So you don't have your hands on them, but when you have to turn a page, you kind of carefully, hook your finger under the page, turn it. And then the book is held open with, it's kind of, I think they call it, it's a snake. It's like it does look like a snake. It's almost like a rosary with big smooth stones. And then you just kind of carefully lay that across and it holds the page open. So, but, Dottore Vian, who was very kind, and he allowed me to see them. So that was the first time that I had a chance to sit with them. And it was very incredible.
Yeah, what a process, but very worthwhile, I imagine, in the end, to be able to be in such close proximity to just, incredible treasure, really, is the only way I can describe it. Now, yes. Sandy, what about the content of the letters? What can you tell us about that?
Well, so returning to 2012, before my second visit, which was this past October of 2019, right? I have to fast forward through the years. My first experience in opening, and of course I had done a lot of research beforehand, and I had reviewed the transcripts of the letters, of which there are many, and that in and of itself is an interesting story, because the first copies of these letters were made in kind of the very early to mid 17th century, but there are a lot of mistakes that are recorded in various versions of the transcripts. So, I had looked at a bunch of those, and I had a set of the transcripts with me, even though when you go into the manuscripts room of the library, you are only permitted a notebook, 2 pencils, your eyeglasses if you wear them, a magnifying glass. There's nothing else that you're permitted to have in there. There are no phones, there are no computers, there are no cameras. You need to make your own notes and you're allowed to have, of course, a sheaf of notes that you can refer from. So I had those, and, I went in, and as I waited and waited, I studied the transcripts and became more and more nervous. But when I finally did receive the book, and I was, by the way, called to the front of the room, you're assigned a seat. The benches are hard. It happens to not be a luxurious or uber comfortable room within the beautiful, beautiful Vatican Library. But I was called to the front, sat right in front of the scriptores, the librarians, and eventually they handed me, this volume. And it's extremely unassuming. I mean, it's kind of in a book of, there are some other documents in there, and it's wrapped in this like kind of celery green linen with no embellishment. So you open it and you see that there's a title page that is in French, that it's letters from Henry VIII to Anna Bolena. And, it kind of, there's a date in there, but it's the date that it was bound in the book. And then you open it, and the first letter is his missive to her, "To my mistress and friend," and that one's in French. And it's just like overwhelming, because you look at them and you realize these were meant for her eyes only. And here I am, this person from the 21st century, in a country that they didn't even really know much about at all. And I'm reading these letters, and you're immediately struck by how personal they are and how intimate they are. And his writing is it's different on each letter, which in and of itself tells a story. So so you're reading the content, there are the words, and then there's the look and feel. And you can see them online. They are digitized, and it's very interesting to see them, but it's such a different experience in having them right in front of you, where you can see every ink stroke that he made, the places where the ink splatters, from the nib of the pen. There are places where his hand smudged, when he was writing. And interestingly, almost every letter, except for the ones toward the end when he became they were very familiar with each other and things were much more casual. He wasn't nervously courting her like he was in the early letters. The early ones, all of the writing skews up to the right. So in other words, if when you slant your paper and you're writing, especially when you're first learning how to write and you don't have lined or ruled paper and you're writing and your writing is all like runs up to the right. It's very pronounced on almost all of the letters. And I don't know why that was, how he had the page slanted, but you can kind of tell that he wasn't in love with writing. There are a lot of scratch outs and changes of words, but the early ones are so very formal. So you get a very clear sense of him trying to create a really neat, beautiful page for her. And it's just so sweet, it's very endearing because he wanted the page to look a certain way. I think the first go round when I was in there, I have to admit, I went in and it was early days in my research about the two of them, and I did not really know how I felt about Anne's feelings for him and the way they conducted their early relationship. I mean, as we know, what is often spoken is that she really was very coy and kept him at bay for 6 years. And I kept thinking, that I sort of bought that, but I thought, how does anybody keep a king at bay for 6 years and not really return much? And, but I kind of took that at face value. And when I saw them the first time, my first overwhelming impression was that very shortly after they started writing to each other, she loved him very, very much. that she loved him. They had a very extremely close relationship. And that was, that washed over me. And that was my major takeaway on that visit. And there were many things that led me to that. It was the familiarities that he used with her, the way his writing became much more casual, the way he joked with her. And you knew that there had to be that kind of feeling being returned, because he was not a stupid man. So he would not have been acting that way or expressing himself in that way unless he was getting a very sincere return of feeling.
I do want to ask you, though, because everything you're saying is so intriguing and fascinating. So do you think that it's fair to say that, you're talking about the letters being quite formal at the beginning and then turning into more sort of intimate, casual, that type of thing? Would you say that there's a lot more of the sort of language of courtly love at the beginning, and that it's quite that kind of relationship at the start? And then as time passes, and obviously they've spent some time together as well in between these letters, that it becomes something more intimate and the relationship obviously changes?
Absolutely. So I'm going to give you some examples. And I also just want to say, I know that there are a lot of people who are very angry at Henry for what he did to Anne. And I share that. It's after the second visit. So the second visit, I was accompanied by Louisa, and the two of us were in there, and she looked at them as well, because I wanted her view of what impression she got. I looked at them first. We couldn't see them together. I spent time with them first, and then she spent time with them. And later, when we had a chance to debrief, I said, so tell me, what did you think? And she looked at me and she said, I have one thing to say. What happened? And that is exactly how I feel. But, my caveat here as we talk about these is we are looking at a window in time of their relationship. And we do not, when these letters were being written, read, treasured, stolen, they did not have hindsight. They didn't know what was going to happen. Anne didn't know what was going to happen to her. Henry didn't know what was going to happen with him to cause him to sign off on her death. So it's kind of a very important point that you have to keep in mind when you're looking at these, because, I have seen people make comments, and, I'm not blaming them, but they're saying, well, he just went into this manipulating her because he wanted to, get the best of her and see whether she would have a son, but he always knew that it was not going to end well. And you can't, you just can't look at them with that perspective. So, we are looking at them from a period of approximately 1527 till about 1529, or possibly at the latest 1530. That's when they were penned. And, it was a very idyllic time in their relationship, other than the fact that they were frustrated in waiting to get the approval from the Pope, which we know they did not get. Also, the way they are pasted in this book, which that is exactly how it is. The letters are on parchment, a vellum. The paper is not that big. It's like maybe a little bit longer than the length of your hand in length, and then in width, it's a little bit less than that. So the papers are kind of small, and they're actually pasted on a larger paper in this book. So whoever, put them in the book when they arrived at the Vatican, that's how they are. And they're in a certain order. And generally speaking, they go from earlier to later, but they're clearly not in the right order. So you can tell that by what he's talking about, the way he's talking to her. Some of them can be fixed in time based upon, certain events that he's discussing, but many of them can't be. And you just have to estimate where they would be looking at what was being said. But so, for example, the first one that's in the book is not probably the first letter. And we don't even know whether we have the first letter that he wrote to her. There may have been some before the ones that arrived in the Vatican. I don't know. Interestingly, and to your question, there certainly is a very early one where you can see him putting on his kingly crown. And also, let's not forget, this man was probably the most glorious king in Christendom. He sparred with Francois I for that title, but by and large, he was like the cat's meow. And he had been brought up to know that he was king, the monarch. The king was the be all and end all. So, it's very hard today to look at the terms of their relationship with modern eyes because, we don't know what it was like to be under the, jurisdiction of a king at that era and what it was like for him. His word was law and he was second only to God. So, when you think about it in that way and you see how his relationship developed with her and the love and the patience and the adoration, it really is quite remarkable. But the one letter that is really interesting is an early one where he really was kind of, okay, I am attracted to you. I have a crush on you. I am king. And, let's discuss this. So he basically says, it's initially like, by turning over in my thoughts the contents of your last letters, so there we have it. She had been writing to him, and it's plural, not just last letters. I have put myself into great agony, not knowing how to understand them. I beseech you now, with the greatest earnestness, to let me know your whole intention as to the love between us two. So we know that there was a mutual attraction happening because he's talking about the love between us two. And then he says, for I must of necessity obtain this answer of you, having been above a whole year struck with the dart of love, and not yet sure whether I shall fail or find a place in your heart and affection. This has hindered me of late from naming you my mistress. Once, since you only love me with an ordinary affection, and I please do the duty of a true and loyal mistress and give up yourself, body and heart to me, who will be, as I have been, your most loyal servant. He then says, I will take you for my mistress, casting off all others that are in competition with you. This is, she must have been like, wow, this is great. Out of my thoughts and affection and serving you only, I beg you to give me an entire answer to this my rude letter. And so you can see there that he's kind of coming at it like, there is some courtly love there, but I am king, and I've been showing you that I'm interested in you, and now, I'm sort of commanding you, tell me how you feel. And I really wondered what she thought of that, but as we know, our Anne, she didn't just crumble and succumb to that. I think there was some additional back and forth that went on before she declared her intentions for him.
I wanted to talk about one letter that perhaps people listening are quite familiar with, because we do tend to see it quite a lot, and it's a very anguished, letter that Henry wrote Anne we think it was in around the summer of 1528, when
Yes.
he, there was quite a big sweating sickness epidemic going on, kind of timely with what we're all dealing with at the moment. And Anne had retreated to Hever, and he discovers that she's fallen ill with the sweating sickness. And of course, we all know how scared Henry was of disease, and he did his best to stay away from it. And he put himself into lockdown in those situations. So could you tell us a little bit about this letter? Because I think this does reveal quite a bit about their relationship and Henry's character. And that would be really great.
Yes, I definitely want to talk about that. I just want to mention before we talk about that letter, and I think a lot of people are familiar at least with this event in time. So there is a letter. It's kind of the famous one with the heart. So many people have seen that because that is one letter that is fairly available, the image of it on the web. This came a little bit after the struck with the dart of love letter. And so, and apparently she had then sent him the present of the golden ship with the, damsel being tossed in the sea, and the diamond, you are my port in a storm. And she had let him know in a letter that accompanied with this gift that she was his, essentially. And so that particular letter is really, really poignant, because when you see it, it's the care that he must have taken to write it is just really heartrending. It's so carefully penned. So his letters, it's so tiny. His letters are really neat. He's only scratched out once or twice, so you could tell that he really wanted to make a really beautiful paper for her, really lovely, lovely page. And at the end, it is where he signed his name and he put her initials in the heart. It's hard to describe how tiny that is. I mean, really, the heart is no bigger than your baby fingernail, like maybe even smaller than that. And inside there are her initials. So I don't even know what kind of nib he must have been using for this pen, but it must have been really tiny. And for him, a man who had hands as big as he did and as large as he was, to create that with his initials and her initials, which were beautifully scrolled. I mean, it was like a piece of artwork that he created for her. And it's really, it just screams off of the page how moved he was and how much in love with her he was. So we have that. And then it does move on to that particular summer. You're right, when people were getting sick. And, it is really especially moving for what we're going through today, when you think about everybody kind of trying to just huddle and be in a safe place. And he sent her off. She went to Hever, and I think he went to Hunston with Catherine and Mary. And I know that people will say, well, he banished her. But truthfully, in terms of protocol, that was what had to be done. He had to sequester himself with, the royal family. And so, but you're right. This letter is jarring. I mean, you turn the page and it's like you just gasp, because it's a mess. I mean, it is full of ink blotches, and you can tell there's so much dark ink that he must have been literally jabbing the pen, the quill, into the ink pot and writing and continuing to just jab and write, because there's blobs of ink, there's smudges. It's hastily written. And he does say, there came to me in the night the most afflicting news possible. So you seem pretty certain that he, got a knock on his door, or whoever was, accompanying him, whoever his grooms were who were with him at the moment, got the message, woke him up, told him, and he must have written this in the middle of the night. And it says, for I have reason to grieve upon 3 accounts, because I heard of the sickness of my mistress, whom I esteem more than all the world, whose health I desire as much as my own, and who the half of whole sickness I would willingly bear to have her cured. And then, he then goes on to talk about how terrible he feels that they're apart. And then, and I've also heard people feel very badly that he didn't have his best physician go to her. But he then says, the third reason is because the physician in whom I trust most is absent at present. So apparently that physician was not with him either, when he could do me the greatest pleasure. So he does send, Dr. Butts to her. But I beseech you, he says, to be governed by his advices with relation to your illness, by your doing, which I hope shortly to see you again, which will be to me a greater cordial than all the precious stones in the world, written by the secretary who is and always will be. And then he took some time to draw the heart again with her initials in it. And it's really heart-wrenching. you can see how panic stricken he was, that he might not see her again and that she would die, and they would not have been together. And you look at that and you can have no doubt about how he felt. So it's really gives you quite a visceral sense of what their relationship must have been like at that time. And of course, fortunately, she did recover, which, maybe was actually pretty miraculous.
Yeah, I think it was miraculous, and I'm pretty sure that's the same epidemic in which her brother-in-law died.
Yes.
Yeah. And lots of others, yeah.
He writes her a letter later. It might have been the next one, actually. It's not the next one in the book, where he now knows that she is at least out of the worst danger, and it's kind of chatty / businessy, but you can feel his relief. And then he goes on to talk about, this one died and that one died, but then, this one recovered. And, so he kind of gives an account of those he knows who have made it through and those who have not. So you're right. It was a crapshoot, basically.
Yeah. And I think the fact that it does sound like he was woken at night, or disturbed at least in the evening. So I think that also shows that whoever it was that woke him or disturbed him understood exactly what Anne meant to him, and was able to, and knew they had to give that news immediately rather than wait till the morning. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, there was probably when you think about it, there was probably a rider who was dispatched from Hever to deliver the news to him. So whoever she was with at Hever at that particular time, knew enough. And I don't know, and I should know, but I don't know whether her father was there at that time or not, but they knew enough to send a messenger to the king. So, and he probably rode all night or into, at night.
Yeah, you mentioned some of these features that the letters have, like the little love heart and, some of the sort of ink blobs from the different, obviously, depending on the king's mood at the time, he's either writing very neatly or he's scratching hastily. Or are there any other features that we haven't mentioned yet that you think are worth noting, apart from the little love hearts, which are really lovely? If you can find an image online, and I'll try and see if we can share something. And the ink blobs, was there anything else that kind of strikes you about the physicality of the actual letter?
Well, Henry's writing, I think in normal circumstances, and I've seen in person some of his business writing. I was at the British Library about a year and a half ago, and I got to look at a kind of a ledger book, or a book of business letters and documents that were written by Risley. And Henry had taken them, it was really interesting, and had corrected and, kind of scratched out some things and written in the margins and, kind of gone over them. And his writing normally was very, I would say, bombastic, like he was big, scrawly. I mean, he was obviously very skilled. So, but it was, he was a big man and he wrote big. As the letters progress, you can see some of that returning, because he does not feel the need to have this like neat, perfect page. And the writing becomes much more casual and much, larger and more scratch outs, kind of more casual. I mean, the hearts are really amazing, and they're amazing because really on the web, when you see them, it's hard to tell how tiny they are, but when you realize how small they are and how big he was, that is really noteworthy. And it is interesting to see the places where he would scratch stuff out, or where he would, grab some more ink and then, maybe smudge it. But I think what's also very, very interesting and noteworthy is, as they became closer and closer, two things happened in what he would say to her. One was, and this is how I felt when I saw them the second time. As I said, the first time was all about my surprise and my, kind of conviction that she loved him very, very much. The second time was just a remarkable sense of the complexity Henry and how capable he was of patience and tolerance and just being very loving. My note said such an incredibly strong, patient, tolerant love he had for her. And the things that he was saying to her really personify that. So, you can see that in a letter where obviously she must have been, as these years went by and they were waiting and her biological clock was ticking and things became more and more frustrating. Obviously, there were times where she became really frustrated. And I'm sure there were times when he became really frustrated, but together they held each other up. There is this one where it says, "For which reasons I beg you, my entirely beloved, not to frighten yourself, nor to be uneasy at our absence, for wherever I am yours, and yet we must sometimes submit to our misfortunes, for whoever will struggle against fate is generally but so much farther from gaining its end." And I thought that was really an interesting statement, especially based upon what we're going through right now. We're frustrated and we're struggling. And it says, "Wherefore, comfort yourself and take courage and make this misfortune as easy to you as you can. And I hope shortly to make you sing for joy of your recall." And then he says, "No more at present for lack of time." But he took the time, and it was just kind of a very insightful and very thoughtful commentary that he offered to her. It's not really what you would typically think Henry capable of, but he really was. And you can see that trait throughout. I mean, you have all of these letters. They spanned a good period of time. In the letters, he never wavered. He never got nasty, testy, short with her in any way. So it really does kind of underline what the heck happened, which, that's a whole other subject. One of my favorite ones is really toward the end of the grouping. He, as we know from some of the things that we've read, he did get bawdy with her. And there was the one, I wish to be in your arms instead of, near your brother, which I thought was funny. And, I wish to, be able to kiss your duckies, which is, which also says, and that was kind of fairly early on. And it also tells me that they had a physical relationship kind of earlier than maybe we think they did. They didn't consummate it, and that's what we're pretty sure of today. But, there was some nookie going on for sure. But then toward the end, he is talking about, I guess she had a really difficult period of time. And then she came around and he was writing, "To inform you what joy it is to me to understand of your conformableness with reason, of the suppressing of your, vain thoughts and fantasies." And so I guess, she settled down and he was acknowledging that was really good. And then he goes into saying, so let's see, "For me, the greatest quietness that may be in this world is when we're together." And then he says, "The cause why this bearer stayeth so long is the business that I have had to dress up gear for you, which I trust before long to see you occupy, and then I trust to occupy yours, which shall be recompense enough for me for all my pains and labors." So he's basically saying to her, I'm having clothing made for you, and I want to see you in them, and then I want to see you out of them. That'll be, my gift for all that we've been through. I can't wait to see you in the clothes and out of the clothes. They exchange some, little sexy banter there. And it's quite endearing.
It is. And another reason why these are so important, this series of letters, there's nothing like it in terms of Henry's other letters. These are intimate, at a time when letter writing, and Sandy, we're both quite obsessed with letter writing and love learning all about it. And we know that was a time when letter writing was quite a public act. Generally
Yes.
letters passed through the hands of lots of people. There were secretaries involved. There were drafts made. There were messengers taking letters, people reading things together. So these are quite incredible because it's quite obvious that Henry wrote them and that they were for Anne to see and no one else really. So it's quite amazing.
It really is. And I mean, we learned a lot about that from James Daybell's wonderful session. And it's quite interesting because, we don't think about letter writing in that way. And clearly you can see that, a lot of the other documentation that Henry is accountable for were drafted by secretaries, by his scribes, his scriveners. And, then, yes, he might go in and change them, but these were missives from his heart, and they were meant for her eyes only. And so to be able to see them and to know what they say is quite incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, Sandy, the letters, unfortunately, are undated, which has led to a number of people kind of ordering them, depending what biographies you read and that sort of thing. People will order them differently. What have you kind of found out? You've talked a little bit about the fact that you think they date from about 1527 to maybe 1529, early 1530. What have you found out about the timing of these letters?
Well, that's a good question, and it's something I hope, as I am preparing to attempt to write a book about them. There hasn't been anything written about them for quite some time, and I hope to do a study that will apply context around each of the letters. And certainly Professor Ives in The Life and Death of Anne Boleyn did a really admirable job of discussing them and kind of placing them in time. But to be fair to him, he was a great student of her life, but I don't think he did kind of a drill down into just the letters. So, I hope to put them in an order and to see how much ground we can cover in looking at the context. I've also spoken with Owen Emerson, who is one of the heads of Hever Castle and is Dr. Owen Emerson. He's really extremely knowledgeable, and he promised that he would help me kind of try to fix the points in time when they know Anne was at Hever during those years. So that will help. So I don't really have the answers. Now, as I said, you can kind of tell which ones should come first just by the sequence of things that he said to her. And when he comments on your last letter, or you promised to tell me and you didn't, so you can kind of sequence them in that way. And it is a little bit shocking that many of the books or many of the things that have been written since about the letters since really kind of the early 1700s, just some of them have them like way wrong. I mean, and it's patently obvious that they're way out of order. And as I said, the book that they're in the Vatican, they're not in the correct order.
Now, Sandy, when I mentioned in our Talking Tudors Facebook group that I was going to chat to you about the letters, there were lots of interesting comments made. And of course, one of the questions that people have, and that I know, is on all of our minds when we think about this, is how on earth did these private letters written by the King of England to his mistress at the time end up in the Vatican Library?
I know, isn't it really incredible? Nobody knows for sure, but I will tell you what I suspect, and I'll tell you what I'm trying to do to see if I can put more fact around the suspicion. My suspicion is that they were stolen from Anne. So whether they were taken while she was at Hever or taken while she was, at another spot where the court was, we don't know. But I think it's fairly obvious that they were taken and sent to Pope Clement as evidence that Henry was not seeking a divorce strictly and only because he felt that his previous marriage was unlawful, but that in fact he was having a pretty hot and heavy romance with Anne. Who took them? We don't know. But if you start to kind of think about what might have been or what things were like then and the way it might have happened, there's one thing that we know for sure. They arrived in a group. So they're placed in the book in a group. They would not be placed the way they are had they arrived piecemeal. So the fact that they arrived in a group clearly means that they were taken in a group. That then means that if they were stolen from Anne, she kept them together, which to me is another strong indicator that of her feelings for him, because she treasured them. She kept them together. I mean, any woman knows if they've, received love letters from a paramour or somebody that they were in love with, you treasure them. You keep them together. You don't, oh, here's another letter from Henry and leave it on this desk or, put it in this chest of drawers. You keep them together. And so that's how they were taken and that's how they were sent. It had been thought that perhaps Cardinal Campeggio had them, but there is early documentation that says that when he was headed back to Rome, his bags were inspected and the letters were not there. They were not found. They weren't there. So who took them? Well, it's probable, I believe at least, that there was a spy and that somebody who knew about them wanted to send them to the Pope. So obviously somebody who was a Catherine supporter, a papist, opposed what was going on with the rumblings of reform. But then you think, who would have had access to Anne's rooms, and who would have known that she had these letters? So, it's just my imagining that somebody paid a maid or a chamberer who knew that she had them because, a maid knew where she kept her personal belongings and, was paid to take them and deliver them to whoever the perpetrator was who was going to send them on to Rome. So in the meantime, what I am trying to do to see if I can provide any additional data is I have been in touch with the lovely Dr. Vian, who, when I first went to the Vatican Library, he was the head of ancient manuscripts. It just so happens now that he is the head of the secret archives, which, they've now changed that name to the Apostolic Archives. And in the secret archives is all the documentation from and to the popes. I have asked him, but of course now we're in hiatus and they're closed. I've asked him if he can help me or assign an archivist to help me to see if there is any documentation about these letters that's in the secret archives. So the secret archives is a separate entity from the Vatican archives. And, it's even more difficult to get in there. And frankly, I never tried. If I were to go back to Rome, I might try. But, everything is in Italian. So I'd have to have my, my wonderful colleague, Luisa, with me. And it seems to me that there should be some correspondence to or from Pope Clement about these, and perhaps who delivered them, editorial comment about them, something. Yeah. So with any luck, I will either get an answer that no, there is nothing, or yes, we will help you look. Dealing with them at, the administration at the Vatican Archives, they're extremely polite and very lovely people, but it's challenging. They're very careful about the treasures that they hold there. And they just want to be sure that they're not releasing information that is going to be published everywhere, just indiscriminately. That's kind of my quest that I'm on, and we'll see what happens. But that's what I think. I don't know. I'd love to hear what people's comments are about that. To me, it had to have been somebody who had access to her quarters, and, it wouldn't have been kind of one of the, I don't know, it wouldn't have been a papal legate, or it wouldn't have been, and how did they even know that he was writing letters to her? She wouldn't have been broadcasting that all over court. Hey, I got another love letter from Henry. So
yeah, it's another one of those Tudor mysteries, isn't it?
It is. It was a private matter, and somebody knew about them, and somebody took them.
Well, I can't wait to hear about your further study and your research and see what it is you might be able to uncover or not uncover. But at least then we know that you've done that thorough research into it.
Right.
Which is great. So I know that the other thing I suppose that people often ask is about Anne's responses. Now, we know that she sent responses because Henry obviously refers to them in his letters, and we know that Anne wrote letters and that she was, she spoke her mind. So is your feeling that the responses, like so much of what belonged to Anne, was destroyed or disappeared after her execution?
I mean, that's what I think. We don't know, and my only assumption would be that he had them and he got rid of them.
That makes sense, unfortunately, in that time where they were trying to remove her from memory.
Mm-hmm.
That would make sense to get rid of those and not keep something like that. But all right, fantastic. Now, Sandy, I want to talk to you before we finish up here about what you're currently working on, because I know that you're working on some pretty exciting things apart from your study and research into the love letters. So would you like to tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for asking. I kind of have my two different avenues, my Tudor research, which is, such a love of mine. And I also am a novelist who is trying always to increase her skill level in story writing. So I have just completed, it's actually taken me about 4 years to write a novel, and its working title is Pursuing a Masterpiece. And it starts with a young woman researcher who is a doctoral student who happens to stumble upon a clue in the Vatican Library about a double portrait of Anne and Henry. There is a note that is a warning about the contents of this portrait and the meaning of it. And she goes on a search and she finds that it's not ever been recorded in any of the art history that is available. So she begins a quest for it, and it kind of takes her over various compelling moments in the past 500 years. And, as she searches for the portrait, she also finds herself in many ways. So it was really fun to write. It was really research driven. It was a long project, and I have it now, and I'm just finalizing it and getting ready to see how I might be able to launch it to the world. So I have that. I'm always interested in continuing my study of the Tower letter, the letter that I believe that Anne authored when she was in the Tower, and it was a letter to Henry. And to me, it's, especially when you pair it with the content of these letters and the tone, to me, it's very, very, very much what Anne would have expressed to her husband at that moment in time. So, I've been looking at trying to find out who the scribe was who wrote the copy that is actually in the British Library, because we know it's not in Anne's hand. So, I continue to work on that and see what kind of progress I can make. And then, there's this, I'm going to be, kind of launching into writing a book about these letters at some point this year. And that's, that'll keep me out of trouble pretty much as possible.
Oh, that's so wonderful. I can't wait. I've heard lots about it, obviously, from our mutual friend, the lovely Adrienne Dillard as well, who's had a peek at it and absolutely loves it. So I can't wait to have a read of it, Sandy. It sounds so good. And your Tower letter. I'm excited about all of it. Now, I have some exciting news for our listeners, because we have a very, very special giveaway that's going to accompany this episode. Before I tell people how they might enter that, Sandy, do you want to let them know what it is that they might be able to win?
Yes, I would love to give the lucky winner a set of my 3 books. And the first 2 are, it's a series. I mean, can you call 2 a series? I don't know. But it is Struck with the Dart of Love and Truth Endures, which is, was my study of the relationship between Anne and Henry. And it's, it's kind of like narrative nonfiction. So it is a novel, but it was based on a lot of research that I did. And so both of those, and then my book, Anne Boleyn's Letter from the Tower, a new assessment. So that'll be included in the grouping.
Wow, that's amazing. So generous. Thank you so much for that. And for anyone listening, I suggest that you head over to my website, www.onthetudortrail.com, and you'll find a post there that allows you to enter that wonderful giveaway. And I'll also, of course, post about it on my social media account. So there'll be lots of ways for you to enter that. And again, thank you, Sandy. That's so generous.
Oh, you're welcome.
Now, there's thank you. And they're great books, by the way, everyone. I'd like to finish now with, in a little bit differently to my normal Talking Tudors episodes where we do our little 10 to go. You and I have done that before and had fun doing that. So I'd like to finish with a question from one of our listeners this time. Now, this is quite a complex question, Sandy, so let's see how we go. But Rachel, the lovely Rachel Poole, would like to know when you feel that Henry's feelings for Anne started to change. And the million, billion, trillion dollar question, what do you think went wrong?
Yes, it is the $1 million question. As you know, Louisa said to me, what happened?
Yeah.
So, and it is, you come out of looking at these letters and you think, oh my gosh. Well, I have a fairly unusual and complicated picture of Henry, if you will, a picture of who he was, especially after looking at these and spending time with these. I think clearly it was a perfect storm. I think things were going wrong. I think, as you've said, Natalie, from your research, life had become, in Tudor England, had become extremely pressurized and complicated as of, 1535, 1536. It was tough going. He was under a lot of pressure. He was aging. And we know that he was probably having intermittent difficulty in the bedroom, which for a man like Henry was probably very devastating. I mean, I think he probably was a person who never saw himself aging because, it's tough to age anyway for all of us. But I think for him, he was such like a paragon of virility and manliness and handsomeness, and that, any sign of aging he took very personally. It was really difficult. The miscarriages were really tough because at that point, and again, don't forget, he was the monarch. He was second only to God. It was not his fault. It was her fault. So there was that. And then, then there was Cromwell, who factored large into this picture and knew Henry's vulnerabilities probably better than anybody other than Anne, and maybe better than Anne, and was able to, this is how I feel about Cromwell. He was able to orchestrate the exact situation that would drive Henry to basically the point of madness. And that was that he was cuckolded by younger men who were his friends and fed right into his personal self-doubts. And, I think all of that came together in a rush, because it is really, really sad and difficult when you read reports of them on progress well into the autumn of the previous year. And we know that they were doing very well together at that point. I mean, there are a lot of reports that said they were married together and, they had a really good time on that progress. So, things changed drastically. And, I am definitely of the belief, and I may be among few, but I did happen to stumble upon something in my research in the British Library, and it is in my Tower Letter book, a statement by a Franciscan friar who happened to have access to the court. He was a contemporary of Henry's, and he said that he was told by several of the nobility that Henry had great grief nearing his death of what he had done to Anne and the way things had gone with her and her daughter Elizabeth. And I am of the belief that Henry tried in all of the subsequent wives that he had to duplicate the love and the passion that he had with Anne, and he was unable to. And it was very disappointing to him and heartrending to him. You know, I think it was really difficult. I'm not saying that he wished he had Anne back. I wouldn't go that far, but I think he had that amazing, passionate, incredible love with her. I think he loved Catherine dearly, but I think the relationship he had with Anne was something that was quite amazing. And, you know, there's a fine line between love and hate, and somehow that line got crossed. And then I think he wished that he would be able to duplicate it, and I don't think he ever did with any of the subsequent wives. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
And thank you, Sandy, for that very thoughtful response. It is a difficult question, and you and I both have been researching this period for a long time, and it is a very hard one to answer, especially when you've only got a few minutes in which to do it. So right. I think you've done really well, but I agree with you that the context played a huge part, and I've been delving into that for a long time now, and I think it goes a long way into explaining what happened in May 1536, and I agree that Cromwell also played his part there, and despite sort of popular belief, I think he was waiting in the wings to bring her down and her family down way before she even became queen. So there you go. People can comment as much as they like about that, but that's what I've been led to believe through my research, that it wasn't a simple argument and that's it. So it's so interesting, so fascinating. But there's one more thing before I let you go that we do here on our All Things Boleyn episodes, and that's I'm going to ask you for a Boleyn takeaway. So rather than just a Tudor takeaway, a Boleyn takeaway. So something that might help our listeners after this episode, delve a little bit deeper into the life of the Boleyns or Anne or anybody. Do you have a Boleyn takeaway for us?
Right. Oh, you know what? This is like the toughest question out of all, because there are so many things and there are so many resources, and there are some of the most wonderful websites, and there's the Talking Tudors, and there's On the Tudor Trail, and there's just a lot going on right now, provided by some amazingly intelligent, dedicated people who really have uncovered some fun stuff. So I guess my thought would be, I think if people haven't nosed around on the website for the British Library, they should, because there are a lot of documents and things on there that, they have a great search engine. And when you go on their website, first of all, you can sign up to be kind of connected to them. And that's really easy to do. They have a very user-friendly website, but they have a great search engine, and you can type in Anne Boleyn, you can type in Anne Boleyn and Hever, or you can type in the love letters, and you'll get so many resources coming up, and they're very easy to navigate and read. And when you select one, there's always like details, so you can click on details. Some of them have digitized versions of the books themselves or the documents, and you can actually see them. So it's just a treasure trove of info. And actually a lot of the books that come up or the documents you can access online through, archive.org or JSTOR or one of those, and really dig in and kind of see what is said and see what it looks like in its original.
Yeah, fantastic takeaway. And that I promise you, everyone, you can spend hours lost in the British Library's website.
That's so true.
Sandy, thank you so much. We've come to the end of our episode. It's, as usual, always so wonderful to chat with you, and I can't wait to hear all about your exciting projects. So thank you so much for talking Tudors with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really had fun. Thanks, Natalie.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Talking Tudors. Thank you so much for joining us. I absolutely love to hear from listeners, so if you have any comments or suggestions, or just want to say hi, please get in touch with me via my website, www.onthetudortrail.com, where you'll also find show notes for today's episode. If you've enjoyed the show, please share the podcast with friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. I also invite you to join our Talking Tudors podcast group on Facebook, where you can interact with other Tudor history lovers and hear all the behind-the-scenes news. You'll also find me on Twitter. My handle is On the Tudor Trail, and on Instagram as The Most Happy 78. It's time now for us to re-enter the modern world. As always, I look forward to talking Tudors with you again very soon.